growth progressive, and he means it. And so when we talk about how we can facilitate climate adaptation or mitigation or environmental justice, we come at that from a place and from my perspective, a guiding principle, which is that by uniting economic development and environmental improvement together, we promote the public good. That I find anathema the proposition that somehow we have to make a choice between good economic development and the growth of our communities and the empowerment of our people and the preservation and good stewardship of our environment, because done well, these two things facilitate one another. And I come at that from a perspective and a 20-year background in environmental protection that started with working for vulnerable communities as a advocate and organizer for folks who had been stricken with illness from drinking contaminated water, and I became a victims' rights lawyer, and then ultimately a infrastructure development and environmental attorney, and have helped clients find that place of balance between how a good prospect, whether it's a new port or a new bridge or a new high density development or a new modern downtown, can at the same time that it drives economic growth, a good rate base, we can also do good for the environment. And actually we must, right? Because we need to make sure that we're putting in place the mechanisms that are going to benefit us long-term, right? If you give something like climate change or stormwater or justice and equity short shrift, it only comes back around to diminish the returns later. And so with that in mind, I wanted to make sure this group, number one, first knows that my door is always open. And I believe that the key to success from a policy perspective is dependent upon coordination and compromise and partnership. So I am glad that we have somebody like Kerry Kirk-Flew who can help troubleshoot for our local partners. And I look forward to ways that we can engage around all of the big policy initiatives that we have going, as well as the issues where you need some help from this agency, be it from Green Acres or with respect to parks development, be it with respect to permitting, or a business that is striving to locate in your community and needs the DEP's help for a way forward. We are here for all of the above. With respect to climate change, the governor has an ambitious agenda that I've been proud to be part of the last couple of years and am eager to move forward. But that agenda too is informed by this balanced approach, like Mayor Kovacs said at the beginning, that recognizes that the diversity of this state, that no one size fits all, not ever, and as great ideas as we may think we have at the outset of a new regulation or a new policy proposition, there is a reality that comes later that we must be planful toward, that we must build ourselves as we approach a modernization of regulations to account for the realities of climate change, that we recognize that we don't know everything. We must be informed by sound science and be planful, because climate change is not some far off prospect. It is here now, and it will only get worse. But in planning a good response to that, that we don't hobble ourselves from the outset, and that we provide the mechanisms for flexibility and case-by-case analysis that will help to further, again, both of these objectives, helping to promote the development of our communities while making sure as best we can that we're prepared. So what does that mean when we get down to brass tacks? Well, last year in January of 2020, which in some ways feels like 6 years ago, as I'm sure you all can relate to, the governor announced, coincident with the Energy Master Plan, that DEP would undertake this regulatory modernization effort that we call NJ-PACT, or New Jersey Protecting Against Climate Threats. And there's two legs really to this stream of policy. and really to the policy, the climate policy objectives of DEP overall and the administration overall. The first is that we work to reduce the emission of climate pollutants. And so we're pursuing a number of regulatory modernizations that we call climate pollutant reduction, or CPR. And that effort looks to ratchet down over a period of time, many, many years, our climate pollutant emissions from the electric generating sector, some of the commercial and industrial sector with small boilers, modernization of truck fleets for large vehicle owners, and things of that nature, all in keeping with what we delivered to the legislature last year, which is New Jersey's Global Warming Response Act 80 by 50 report. And that's something that I suggest that all of our local partners at least read the executive summary of. 10 pages that explains where we are from a perspective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in New Jersey, and where we have to, what we have to do to get to the legislature's goal of 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. It is an incredible hill to climb. And the only way to do it is one step at a time. While we're pursuing this CPR change to reduce emissions of climate pollutants, we're also looking at how we modernize environmental land use regulations through a series of rule changes that we call resilient environments and landscapes, or REAL, because climate change is real. Through those proposals, we are trying to facilitate changes that will help protect people and property from the present and increasing threats that we know we're seeing today from climate change, and that we know will increase. For example, the increases in sea level rise and chronic inundation being a significant concern for the state of New Jersey. But so when I look at this, and being an environmental lawyer that is very, it's important to acknowledge that our environmental laws or environmental regulations are inherently backward looking, right? We are facing a significant challenge with respect to climate change, water infrastructure, and many other environmental and public health needs. And we're doing that from a regulatory structure that grew up in the 1970s, right? And the primary thrust of which hasn't changed dramatically. And it's focused on legacy issues. It's not proactive in any sense of the imagination. It's mostly reactive. So we're trying through these modernization efforts to flip that paradigm, to be planful, to try to take the approach that we all tell ourselves as elected and appointed officials that we do by looking out for our grandchildren and their children. It's more necessary than ever to live those ethos. And so that's what we're trying to bring into this regulatory reform. And how do you do that? How do you adapt an inherently backward-looking regulatory structure like the Flood Hazard Area Control Act, which I imagine many of our mayors are familiar with, given the water-rich nature of our state? How do you do that to respond to the realities of climate change? There's only one answer: slowly and carefully. For starters, DEP doesn't believe that we can or should do what's been referred to as blue lining large swaths of the state, somehow creating no build zones. That is not a thing. But we should ensure that those who wish to build in flood prone and future flood prone areas are presenting designs that are informed by actual risk, and the risk of tomorrow, not the risk from years ago, which is the type of risk that we get presented with, or the type of risk analysis we're presented with when we look at FEMA flood hazard maps, for example, inherently backward looking, right? So how do we use good climate science to inform future development, future planning? And that's what we're trying to address through these real amendments. And I won't get into too much detail. I'm happy to take questions, but effectively, when we talk about take this in two pieces from a land use perspective, because I also believe there's a good amount of sort of misinformation and worry that gets circulated when folks may hear DEP is doing a new regulation. It's like, I know that's how my former clients would react. So what we're trying to do is be informed by the science as it pertains to New Jersey, right? So if you're looking at if you spend any time looking at climate science, you see one sort of scary report after another coming out of the UN panel on climate change, the IPCC. And it can feel a little abstract or esoteric. What does this mean, for me, for my community? And so what we did last year was to release New Jersey's first ever scientific report on climate change. So that's the other thing I would suggest that mayors take a look at, in addition to the 80 by 50 report. The scientific report on climate change distills the impacts that we anticipate as a function of global warming right here in New Jersey, right? Not in New Zealand, right? Not on the island states, but here, right? And I'll be really clear. We don't need to be terrified. We don't need to be scared, but we need to be planful. And we need to recognize that our state, given its unique low-lying coastal nature and the way the last ice age affected us, we are uniquely vulnerable to climate risks in ways that other places of this country, and in fact, the world, are not. And so we need to be ready for that. Again, slowly and carefully get ready. And we intend to do that through these rule changes by one initiative is to look at how our flood hazard zones are changing as a function of sea level rise, chronic inundation, right? Increased storm intensity and frequency, more rainfall, 11% more, I believe, is one of the predictions by 2050. That's considerable. And we have no small amount of flooding issues already in this state. And so what we want to do is take that science and apply it in the regulatory structure here today that we have, and adapt that regulatory structure. And I believe that environmental law, the future of environmental law and regulation, is more adaptive. That it's not as somewhat sort of static as it has long been. And so we should look at, when we're designing new developments, the impacts of future flooding. We should look at that. We should be informed by that risk. Private developers may choose to take that risk on, and that's okay. Nobody's going to tell them no, but we should be informed by the future risk. I live in a 100-year-old house, right? I also live on one of the highest points in Highland Park, over on Cleveland Avenue. And today we are building things that we expect will last 100 years, right? Shouldn't we build them in a way that they'll actually stand the test of time? And that's what these regulations will bring into focus. That we should make sure that there's going to be dry access in a new development, that the driveways are elevated enough so that in the time of crisis, people can actually get out. We should make sure that commercial buildings are flood proofed. We should make sure that new homes that are either built right on the coastline or along the back bays are elevated enough such that they'll survive, because it's here and it's getting worse every day. And a place that doesn't get enough attention, the Delaware Bayshore. The Delaware Bayshore is the most vulnerable area of the state right now. Right? By 2100, the projections that we're utilizing, great work with Rutgers. We are fortunate to have some of the foremost leading climate scientists in the world right here at Rutgers. And we've worked with them and their peers to develop good projections that are reliable, right? That we know we can have faith in, that aren't unduly conservative. And we've got to apply from a policy perspective the path that we think will protect the most people without working a considerable burden on the continued development and of our thriving areas and those that we want to thrive. But we shouldn't just kind of keep our heads in the sand, so to speak, right? The risk on the coastline from these projections, 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050, 5 feet by 2100. We need to do something with that, right? We're not going to, again, carve out areas of the state that we shouldn't build in, but we should make sure that in these areas, proper precautions are being taken. We should also import these types of considerations into our municipal planning. And I know there was a new law passed that works more demand on our local partners, and we want to help you with that. We will be a resource for you. We will help provide you with the science and the data and the planning tools. We will be there for you. The other thing that we need to be really cognizant of is that with increases in chronic inundation, in frequency and intensity of storms, that we're really taking care to properly manage our stormwater runoff, because it will get us. The size of our stormwater detention structures, if we're using structural solutions because we, for some reason, can't use the green stuff that is better and cheaper, they matter. And they're not going to just matter for the life of the 30-year financing that any development may get. They're going to matter for the life of our whole communities. And so, we're, in some ways, I see New Jersey as, having kicked the can down the road on some key things. CSO management, for example, combined sewer overflows that I know some communities are dealing with. But we are fresh out of road. So it's here now, and we're here, and we're going to work together, and we're going to tackle it in a reasonable, balanced way where we help one another. That's my plan. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about any detail of it.
Thank you. And I have to say, I do appreciate the depth that you've kind of talked about here. Two things. Obviously one of the first issues, and I'm sure everyone's got questions, but since I get to be the president, I get to ask the first two questions. The first one is how can we help? What can we do as mayors, elected officials in our communities to help DEP understand our unique circumstances? Because, obviously everyone lives in the communities, but not everyone understands everything about. So that would be the first question. And then the second question is, I don't know that any of us disagree with anything, but what it comes down to it is funding, right? Because ultimately we don't have the financial resources to do a lot of what should be done or needs to be done, or when there are new pieces of legislation and new rules that get promulgated with that are unfunded mandates. That's what I hear constantly. So I think those are the two questions that I would have for you. And then I'm sure I will have a lot of others as well.
Sure. So I'll start with how you can help us and then how we can help you. So how I think how our local leaders can help us is by helping residents and helping the institutions of local government themselves by simply being informed and making sure that the existence of climate risk is part of the consideration as steps are taken in your own communities, right? And an ounce of preparedness will deliver pounds of benefit at the end, right? And we have seen many financial models and studies that talk about how investments in resilience pay dividends compared to the costs of destruction and restoration, right? Of course, not everyone's going to be able to do all the types of preparedness that would be most appropriate, right? That is a constrained environment that we live in. But even knowing that is helpful, because you may choose to draw a a zone a different way in your planning processes, right? You may take note of the fact that it's going to be really hard to keep the water off River Road. Really, really hard, right? And all the river roads, not just ours, Gil. So it's being cognizant of that when we make new investments, for example, right? When we're investing even our local resources. When it comes then to how we can help you, with respect to the new law from the legislature on climate planning, we are going to help you. We will be your resource. We will walk you through it. We will be an aid. We have a small, lean, but nimble and helpful climate planning staff. And we are going to help develop the materials and the guidance. And the governor's signing statement said just that, because we have the ability to be helpful, and it's exactly what we should be doing.
And then funding?
So I wish I was in control of all funding, right? I wish that we had more shore protection funding. I wish that we had more resilience funding. I am deeply hopeful about the infrastructure plan that the president is pursuing. Climate resilience is a part of that. That is smart, right? One way that we can be helpful with funding in the pots that DEP oversees, for example, in the Green Acres space. How can we help to make sure that those investments, which we are happy to help make, solve multiple problems, right? A resilience park is better than a pocket park, for example, right? How do we utilize our polluter pays litigation recoveries to help further both natural resource restoration and resilience? The pots are limited, right? They will always be limited. There is never enough. I think it has to do with how we identify and really activate our points of leverage.
Okay, fair enough. Let me open it. If you have a question, if you could use the raise your hand on the screen. It makes it easier. Otherwise we wind up because there's almost 70 of us here right now. So if anyone has anything, everyone's trying to find it. That's what we all do, right? Oh,
I see one.
Larry Fox.
Yeah, hi, great presentation. And I'm from a shore town, Bradley Beach. So I've got an extreme interest in all three elements of DEP's goals around resilience, environmental justice and greenhouse reduction, but resilience is the top of my list. You cited something a little while ago about sea level increases, the 2 feet by 2050, and I didn't catch the second part with the 5 feet. So that was the first question, and the tag onto that is, what's the source of this? Because I'm very interested in, I've been doing some research on this and very interested in just locking into that.
Yeah, sure. So what we've done in order to help inform the work here at DEP and across the state is to have worked with Bob Kopp at Rutgers and many others, and we convened what's called the Science Technical Advisory Panel, or STAP, which is a peer group of climate scientists from across academia who deeply study this stuff and have provided many rounds of analysis and projections based on a number of factors. And so if you were to look at our climate science report, which I hope somebody might have put in the chat for us. I see Nick Angarone popping in there. There's a lot of little red bubbles, but I definitely just saw Nick Angarone's name. He's the chief of our climate planning office. And so we can make sure, I'm sure he'll make sure that links are already in the chat for you if they aren't. But that report does describe the STAP's work. And that work came up with a couple of different scenarios based on a few what I would call policy pathways. The scientists aren't going to make the policy, right? They're going to give you the range of potential outcomes, right? And so what they did was give us a range of potential outcomes. And from a policy perspective, perhaps owing to my own centrist sensibilities, we are choosing the middle of the road, right? We're not going with the most extreme outcomes, which by 2100 would be more than 8 feet, right? We're going with 5.
Okay.
And
so it's 2100. Okay.
Yes, that's 2100. And then for 2050, the extreme end would be more than 3, and we're going with 2. And there's a number of reasons for that I think in short we can explain as a function of greenhouse gas reduction, right? So between now and 2050, sea level rise is going to be what it's going to be, meaning it doesn't matter how many EVs we put on the road or how many power plant emissions we reduce, although we must do those things. But the sea level rise we're seeing in the nearer term is a function of emissions that are already been emitted to the atmosphere over the course of since the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
Beyond 2050, our policies on a global scale, that has an ability to impact how bad it will be.
Okay.
We think it'll be in the middle because it requires the whole world, and we're not doing great, right? We're making a lot of moves here in New Jersey. We expect the Biden administration will make moves, and there's encouraging signs, globally as well. So, but though all of the policy efforts tracked with this moderate scenario, what we call a moderate emissions scenario post 2050. And so when you take a moderate emissions scenario and you look at the intermediate level of risk, it brings you to 5 feet. And what does that intermediate level of risk look like? It means that there is a 17% chance that sea level rise will be worse than what we're suggesting people plan to. So, some folks, when I talk about this stuff, will ask me, are we doing too much? Are we going too far? What I lose sleep about at night is not that. What I lose sleep about is that my grandchildren may likely end up thinking that in this moment we did not do enough. But we've got to start somewhere, and we can't punish ourselves while we do it.
No, I'm with you, and this is very helpful. I'll look forward to looking at that document in the chat room, because I had actually been looking at a Monmouth University Middlebury study from 2018 that showed a 3 and 6 foot level rise, and it was a risk assessment by county in the Middle Atlantic states. South Jersey, south of here, had a little bit higher risk rating than we had in Monmouth County. Not that we were kind of low to medium, but the fact remains we've got to plan accordingly, to your point, and continue to assess the risk. But that's an interesting point that you bring up, that 2050 at this point, it is what it is. So that's
right. And there's the step before that, right? It's not as though sea level rise happens all at one time.
Yeah.
It's sort of like my daughter had a toothache last night, and she expected the Advil to work right away, and sort of, no, it's by in an hour you're going to feel better, and you'll feel progressively better, right? Sea level will just get progressively worse.
Yeah.
So to the extent, Mayor, that you want to talk more about in the details with respect to sea level rise analysis and what the science says, we've got a team here from our Division of Science and Research. Nick Procopio is one of our climate scientists. I know he's listening in, and we can organize. This is not the only conversation for us to have, right? This is thick and heavy stuff, and it's going to take work and time, and we're going to just be together. That's like we should be.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yep. No. I'm with you 100%. So I appreciate the answer to the questions, and I'll certainly be keeping an eye on this, particularly in the town I'm in. We've got certainly work to do. Thank you.
The thing that's interesting, and I'll point out for everybody's awareness with respect to sea level rise, it's not intuitive. It's not going to hit initially the places you think it might, right? The Atlantic coast will withstand the rise for longer. The back bays are in danger.
Yeah.
And the Delaware Bay shore, is in prolific danger.
Well, that's interesting. Okay. Gotta think about that. Okay, thank you.
Gail?
Hi there, Sean, it's great to see you. Looking forward to seeing you in person again one of these days. As you're probably aware, and I'm sure Highland Park is very similar to many of our municipalities. We're very densely populated, and our future economic survival really is going to depend on our downtown development, which is going to make us even more densely populated. And of course, there are concerns about the infrastructure. You spoke about that a bit. Most of us have infrastructure that dates back over 100 years laying under our streets. Especially for water infrastructure, we're going through some things here in Highland Park on that right now. I know the question of funding came up before, and will the DEP be able to assist municipalities who need to upgrade their infrastructure, particularly water infrastructure, with funding as we move forward? That's my first question. And my second question is, our planning boards need this education. Is it possible for some sort of webinar to be put together so that planning board members can actually get the same kind of information we're getting and be able to ask questions so that they get the most up-to-date information from the DEP and what we're expecting on climate change, because we do rely on them as we start looking more and more for development.
Those are both fantastic questions, and the answer to both of them is yes. So with respect to water infrastructure, I'll be before the Assembly committee next week for my budget testimony. And one of the things that I'll be sharing some stories about and advocating for is continued investments in water infrastructure. Because when the state makes the continued appropriation that the governor has proposed, we're able to pull in more federal resources. And then by combining the state resources with the federal resources, we are then able to leverage that through the infrastructure bank, through a program we call the Water Bank, which is a combination of DEP and iBank. So in this proposed fiscal 22 state budget, there's an appropriation of $60 million. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but over the last 3 years, because of state appropriation and the ability to pull federal funds and sort of this trifecta that I think of with the leveraging of iBank, we facilitated over $1.5 billion in water infrastructure improvements. If that keeps coming as a means of state appropriation, if we're able to then leverage in the monies from the American Rescue Plan that are targeted for water infrastructure, and then God willing, the president gets the type of water infrastructure investment that he's pushing, we will be able to do remarkable things. Now, I think about this from not purely an environmental improvement perspective. Obviously, we have responsibilities for public health here at DEP, but from an economic development perspective, this stuff puts people to work, and we've got shovel-ready projects that can be dug into immediately. Right. So if folks have not visited with the water bank and made applications through H2O loans, they should. We can get you more information about how to do that, how to explore what it even means, how to get on the project priority list, because it's important. This is not a New Jersey problem, right? This is a national problem. It is about the age of America's bones, right? And they are failing. And we have a real opportunity to maximize environmental protection, protect public health, and put people to work. We should do that. And We've done that over the last 3 years with the 1.5. The way it's trending this year, we may see, depending on project readiness and schedule and all that, $1 billion in a single year, right? So we're moving this stuff. So get on the list.
Yeah, have to do that.
Thank you.
And
Lisa-
with respect to the webinars, just yes. It's just a yes. Let's do it.
Okay.
he's actually going to start a YouTube channel.
Really?
Yes.
Janice agreed to be my first guest. And because we talked about how because she is, she resembles a younger Kristen Chenoweth, we may sing some show tunes.
Sean may sing some show tunes. I will lip sync the show tunes. Okay, Lisa Santuson. Oh, we can't hear you. Nope, now you're muted. Your earbuds aren't connected.
Well, down the space bar, that might work.
No. No, I think it's the earbuds that are not connecting. All right. So while Lisa's trying to figure that out, can I just ask additional questions on the water infrastructure, the iBank? You know, one of the things, so Clinton has a water and sewer utility, and we had issues with getting funding for some of our projects because we're a very small water. I have 4,500 customers. I can't compete with the New Jersey American Waters or the Newark Water utilities. So how do we make sure that we can get the priority consideration for some of those projects as well?
Yeah, so the system generally prioritizes the system for ranking projects generally prioritizes the smaller systems. Usually we don't see large investor-owned utilities making much use of the water bank. The big cities do for sure. But I think it's a matter, I don't know the particular case, but what I would take a look at, and I think any mayor who has a water infrastructure concern for funding, one of the best things you can do is take a look at our website for DEP, and maybe if I don't know if my chief of staff Jane Rosenblatt is still listening, and maybe she can find this and drop the link. What we call the intended use plan, right? We have to publish every year for how we intend to use water bank monies. And that establishes a system for how we evaluate the projects. Take a look at that criteria. If there's something wrong with that criteria that is not helpful to you, we need to know that. So that I think should be the first stop.
Thank you. All right, Lisa, I think you've got it worked out.
All right, hopefully, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I see heads bobbing. All right, thank you very much. So I'm sitting in for Mayor Michael Petrino. I'm councilwoman in New Milford, New Jersey. We're located on the Hackensack River near the Oradell Reservoir, so water management and flooding is very important to us, and as well as wetlands reclamation. I apologize, I ended up getting in late, had a hard time getting the link. My question, as it relates to climate change and future development and how we look at this, I'm curious to know if soil regeneration is on the table, as I'm noticing that Bergen County, New Jersey, northern New Jersey, it's very green, but it's actually a green desert. So I'm noticing that there's a lack in soil health, and a lot of carbon is sequestered in healthy soil. So I'd like to know if that's on the table, if it's part of the plan, and where can you address that? Thank you. I'm complete.
Yes, it's part of the plan and I can address it. So again, I'm going to point back to the Global Warming Response Act 80x50 report. You'll see, again, the executive page, the 10-page executive summary, very much worth it. But one of the final chapters is on carbon sequestration in particular, and the need for what we call a natural and working lands strategy that gets at the issues that you're talking about with respect to carbon retention in soils, but not just in soils, in wetlands themselves. For example, how much of our existing sequestered carbon might end up being emitted into the atmosphere because wetlands will become chronically inundated and ultimately release their carbon. That's something we need to protect against, so that what is a sequestering source does not become an emitter of greenhouse gases and make it worse. So we are undertaking an effort to now begin the development of that natural and working land strategy called for by the 80 by 50 report. And so happy to set up anything that would be helpful for folks here to be engaged in that process. It will certainly have a public component. It's at its beginning stages. What I would say with respect to how you can maintain that health, it's all about green infrastructure, right? How we engineer with nature is how we save ourselves. Right. And that's sort of a hard concept to wrap your heads around, or at least for me, because for many years, we see developments go up, we see these concrete detention basins, and that seems to be the way. Just pipe all the water away, right? But when we do that, we are, number one, costing ourselves more money. Number two, we are not seizing the opportunity for more sequestration and water quality benefits that come with a rain garden or a bioswale. I think the thing that folks sort of dislike about green infrastructure is that it's more scattered, it's less concentrated, it could make it hard to achieve the density you want in a development. But 30 years from now, there will be gratitude for that this was the way, because the retention basins won't be able to hold it. People are going to need more green space, and we will facilitate better water quality in the process. Again, it's sort of this triple bottom line imperative.
Any other questions? I'm just trying to keep scrolling through. I guess something else too, and this is.
You have one up from Colette Kennedy.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, Colette.
Hi, Mayor. How are you? Thank you.
Good. How are you?
Good. And thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for coming to the table to have this conversation, including Mike and Lori for arranging all of this. Thank you. I have a couple questions, if you don't mind. So we are located in the Bay Shore of Monmouth County. Oftentimes we keep hearing about partnerships for coastal ways, but then the bays are not included in that, and they only include the oceanfront municipalities. But the Bay Shores often are kind of forgotten about in a lot of the funding. Hopefully with this new proposed funding, the Bay Shores can be included. So that's one. Two, how often does collaboration take place for coordination between the Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA, and NJDEP? Because I feel like there's a lot of projects that there's like all different silos happening, and property owners aren't really sure which agency they're supposed to listen to first, so to speak. And then who would be the master ringleader of coordinating projects so that everyone's on the same page. And also with the additional funding that's being proposed, do you know if there'll be funding for private or municipal bulkhead repairs? Because there's still a lot of damage post Sandy. I know it's 8 years later, but we still have a lot of homeowners that just can't really bear the brunt. And then what happens, as we all know, is the water goes in the path of least resistance, and then it affects the property owners on either side of that, as well as some projects that are on hold, especially here in Keyport and in the Bayshore area, that because the bulkheads aren't sturdy enough, they can't get the approvals to build. And then the final one is, does the funding also include increasing personnel? I know everyone at DEP works extremely hard, but sometimes we feel like applications for projects take a long time, and sometimes we're told that it's because they don't have enough staff. So I'm hoping that additional personnel can be allocated for DEP as well. Sorry for the multiple questions, but thanks for allowing me to have the time.
Well, no, first of all, thank you, because that just helped me prepare for my budget testimony next week, because I imagine all those questions will come. So that's appreciated. And hello to you. I grew up in Keensburg. So and my mother still lives there. And I know, and I recognize that it can often be an overlooked area. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was with Congressman Pallone in Belford to announce some of the funding that we're trying to drive through the CARES Act to our fishing communities. There being significant fishing community and economic drivers there in the Bayshore, as well as along the coast in the Delaware Bayshore. So with respect to funding being proposed in this budget cycle, what we're trying to do from the perspective of the governor's proposal for $20 million in shore protection dollars is to facilitate our state share of the list of Army Corps projects. And I don't know off the top of my head what they are, but I would imagine that we're talking primarily about beach restoration and beach nourishment. But happy to have our Chief Resilience Officer, Dave Rosenblatt, come back around and share more details on that. With respect to the ringleader, I won't pretend to know the answer, but I will tell you that we're here for you, right? And so if there is trouble in getting answers, you should lean on us, right? We're the state sponsor of those projects, right? And our folks are constantly with the Army Corps. So despite who is lead, we are your people. So lean on us. And with respect to staffing, much like yourselves and I imagine your staffs, there's never enough, right? We have big jobs, they are hard, they are complicated. And it would be great to have all the resources in the world. At the same time, however, I think we have to constantly pay attention to the size and scope of government and make sure that we're meeting our missions in the most efficient way possible, right? So for example, on permitting, one of the things that we've had staff really dedicated to over the last year last year or two actually, because we rolled it out last year, the design and implementation of an all electronic land use permitting system. And it's been voluntary for the last year. There is a rule that will go in place later by this summer that will make it mandatory, right? And that is going to help facilitate the speed of review. And for those projects that aren't automatically on our 90-day clock, we always endeavor to meet that 90-day clock. Sometimes one of the big stumbling blocks are the depth of an application when it comes in the door, right? And so we've got to go back and forth and back and forth. And I loathe that volley of deficiency letter and then give us this and then give us that. The best thing to do is always to get around a table, and a virtual table at that, and try to solve the problem and work together to end in that place where I think is most appropriate, where you're meeting both of these objectives, right? You're facilitating that economic development and that investment in your communities, and you're doing it in a way that's going to preserve the environmental resources that you need today, and you will need more tomorrow.
All right.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. And then was the last final one was the bulkhead funding. Do you think there'll be any allocation for bulkhead funding?
I don't believe that's part of the shore protection appropriation. But again, we can facilitate a conversation with the Chief Resilience Officer's outfit.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Colette. We are bumping up against 1 o'clock here, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Commissioner, thank you. This has been very informative for a lot of us who've struggled to figure out how to manage through. And I think there's going to be a lot more questions that will be coming up. I am going to ask, we have a climate advisory committee of mayors. If you're interested, to please let either Lori Buckaloo or Mike Serra know, so that we can add you to this working group. And
100%.
We intend to make it a working group. We're going to invite Sean to come and be a part of it along with his staff. Because again, when we're all at the table, none of us become the menu.
And the other thing that we hit on the other day, Janice, was to create regular points of engagement and not wait for an issue.
Right.
We should be doing this at least quarterly.
Absolutely. And that's what I'd love for this to be. I mean, if we could do a webinar, webinars are great. You know, even though we all may have some Zoom fatigue, it makes it a little bit easier than having to drive to Trenton. Not that I don't love driving to Trenton, but for us to be able to do this and to continue these conversations, I think will be significant. Obviously, you have Carrie's contact. So if there's anything anyone needs or additional questions, you know, she can get you the answers as she always does. And again, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Commissioner, for your time. And Carrie, do you have any last minute?
Just a couple of last minute wrap ups. All of the items that were dropped into the chat today, we will provide those in our weekly update that we send out on Friday. So please take a look at that. And then I will definitely be following up with Janice and with Lori and Mike on the work group that's been established so that we can schedule a meeting again to have further conversation. There were a lot of issues that were raised today, so we'll maybe pull out one or two of the issues and focus on them and bring not only the commissioner, but some of our maybe technical people to dive a little bit deeper into those issues. So I think this is an ongoing conversation, as the commissioner said, and we're looking forward to working with you and keeping that conversation going and solving the problems.
Is it possible for me to make an announcement?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. This is Councilperson DePalma Iozzi from Caldwell.
Yes.
The Commissioner mentioned rain gardens. There's going to be a webinar with the Rutgers Cooperative Extension Water Resources Program on Thursday, April 29th at 7 p.m. If anybody's interested in finding out more about rain gardens from the Rutgers source of information.
Thank you. That's awesome. If you could, can you email that to Carrie so she can get that out to us?
Yes, I'll try to do that.
Thank you. Anything
Well,
else?
We're going to make a habit of this, and I am deeply grateful for the engagement. And I just want to give Carrie a round of applause because she does excellent work. And thank you, Carrie, very, very, very much for that. I'll give you a call. We'll have a word. You know how much I love a good work plan. We'll make a work plan for this continued engagement. You know, like I said before, just be there for each other because, you know, we only do it together. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. See you
Thank you.
soon.